Being here to come to let you have something.
Melissa says I should get started.
6:30 on the news.
Just so you know,
I want to come to
we
show.
are broadcasting and more or less because of the public meeting, but more importantly, we don't have to take notes. So we're recorded. So just so you know that, we don't want to tell somebody that it's not being recorded. I'm Craig Clark. I'm the executive director of the Allegheny County IDA. This is our first community meeting for the EPA Brownfield grant that we got last October. Took a while to get started for various reasons. We really didn't start until the spring. And then there was this little shutdown that we had.
40 days.
Yeah, so that kind of also delayed some work, but we're back at it and we're really excited about it. So what's a brownfield? We'll talk more about that, but why are we interested in brownfield as the Allegheny County IDA? Because we want to redevelop some of the brownfields. And brownfields typically are sites that have already been developed at one time. They may not be developed now, but they have been developed. And that means they typically have what? Sewer, water, and electric. And that's why we want to redevelop these sites. And we're working with our consultants through the CPA grant so we can do phase 1s and phase 2s and figure out what's actually on the site and actually do some full plans for a couple of the sites. And that gets you to the point where you can attract a developer. So we're really looking for brownfield sites that we can develop. Not that we can't help some brownfield sites just because they're brownfields and we want to do that for the community, but we're looking for brownfield sites that can be developed. This is the first of our, I think we've actually said about 8 of these different community meetings.
Do as many as we can.
But anyways, the community meetings are one is to get people to know what a brownfield really is, what the program really is, what it can do for you, as well as try to identify additional sites. We already have identified quite a few sites and we've got a pretty good site map we've got up there with some sites. And we're continuing to add sites as people want to add sites. I know Kira's going to talk in a minute. He sent out to all the towns in the community. They added quite a few sites in different towns because quite often the town and the residents will know more about a potential brownfield than we would. We're the county level, but we obviously know about some of them. And so the reason we held it in Wellsville is our largest community. We'll have them around the community. Well, it may even have one up in the community. But we do have, we're not going to have them all in Wellsville. So that said, we've got our consultants. We'll go through more detail with the Brownfield grant. We'll fund what we're doing, talk about some success stories. And that was our reason we got involved. I've been to enough economic development meetings that there are a lot of success stories that had much more massive brownfields than we did, and they've actually changed the whole economic development flavor of that community by taking brownfields and developing them, and taking them as not as a negative, but now as an asset to the community, which is what we're trying to do here. With that, Kier, do you want to give your 2 cents as to why this is important for the planning part of the county?
Well, I was going to just give a short history. I'm Kier Durham. I'm the director of planning for Allegheny County. And when I was first starting in planning world back in 1995, I was working for Southern Tier West Regional Planning Board. And it was my first year there. And I heard about this thing called a brownfield. I was like, what the heck is a brownfield? And so I looked it up, and it was not a greenfield. Well, that's a good definition. Thanks. That's very useful. But, you know, in essence, that is it. There's so I went to a conference, a federal conference back then, and learned much more about them. And I came back totally jazzed to do some brownfield work, and realized that there wasn't an inventory across the 3 counties, Chautauqua, Cattaraugus, and Allegheny. And so I talked my director into that and applying for a grant, but unfortunately we did not get it. And then tides turned, things happened, priorities changed. And so I had this dream that we would have had a brownfield inventory of this county and the other 2 all the way back 30 years ago. And why do we care? you know, at least from my perspective back then, was that if we could not keep using cornfields and proper land, prime farmland, all that kind of space, and we could find these places that people were kind of scared of, and actually make a plan and go in and clean it up, then resell it. That would be probably a better option in many cases. And so these guys are going to speak about the details of this program, but I've had this dream for a long time. When Craig brought up that there was an opportunity a couple of 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, I was like, yay, finally! You know, the tide has turned. And so John and I have been tag teaming on the inventory part. I think that it's safe to say we didn't get them all. So we would love for that inventory to be as complete as possible. And then from that, there's priority projects that will develop on there, and that's what they'll discuss further. But for the first time ever, you know, we have a good feel on where a lot of things are. So that's step one, and that was accomplished in less than 6 months. So that's great. So who's next, Craig?
John.
John?
Yeah,
You're in.
all right,
Here's Johnny.
I'm Johnny.
John, you tell them where you're coming from.
Okay, so I am with HRP Associates. We are the QEP for Allegheny County IDA. And like you said, I've spent most of the last couple months basically going on Google Maps where I can, trying to find as many dilapidated buildings and properties that look like they're in disrepair or haven't been touched in years, and putting them on a big spreadsheet and sort of looking up all the details of these properties, ownership, utilities, and basically it's an inventory. So I've been doing that all over the county. And one thing that one of our biggest things that we're still working at is trying to find more of these properties that are out there, because I can only see so much relying on Google Maps, trying to see what's there, looking at all the programs that are in the DEC, any priority sites that we may identify are still likely unknown just because there's only so much information on these properties. Because again, their last use could have been in the 70s, the 80s, and for a bunch of different reasons, nobody has done anything with them. So basically, the big advantage of the Brownfield program is getting all of these ugly, underused properties and trying to make something of them. And I put together this little slide right here, which is, you know, what are brownfields? These are sites that I've worked on, and the main thing I want to just put out there is that there's a school right here in Herkimer, there's a strip mall in Gloversville, and I think this is Remington Arms, if I'm not mistaken, up here. And it's not just old industrial mills. Yes, those are brownfields, but a brownfield to the EPA, especially for this program, isn't necessarily an old industrial facility. It could be a school that's been underused and nothing's happened with it for years, and it's contaminated with asbestos. It might have fuel tanks in the basement. And this program allows us to, with our assessment grant, to go in there and write up a phase one, which is, for those who don't know, is essentially a background report, which takes basically, I've written many of them, and it's sort of a whole history. And I look at Sanborn maps to see, okay, where were the tanks used to be for these properties where all that equipment may be missing. Nobody may be there. It may be a vacant property and maybe a zombie property that no one has looked at. That equipment may be 50 years, 60 years removed, and it's part of my job to go in there and figure out where this stuff used to be. And ultimately, if we can demonstrate that this property is contaminated or it's likely contaminated, whether it's asbestos, it could be petroleum, it could be chlorinated solvents, it could be many things. That allows us we can then go into a phase two, understand what the actual contamination levels are through laboratory samples and taking analysis of soil and groundwater. And then that information is particularly useful for a developer because then they understand what the problems actually are. And that is how we move the program into redevelopment. I don't want to go too far, Tom, into the programs.
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, so basically, yes, this is an assessment grant. We can't remediate properties with this, but this at least gives you information to know and understand what it will take to put it into a program like New York State DCPCP, which is Brownfield Cleanup Program, where you can then go, basically, you can get money to address contamination, dig that stuff up out of the ground, and then you can have a clean site for a developer to hand off. And like Craig said, a lot of these properties that we're looking at, there's a huge advantage for already having electrical infrastructure, the water, the sewer in the ground versus building a new project. We want to put a warehouse on a property. We already have all that stuff in the ground. So there's a huge advantage to understanding what is available, and that's part of what the inventory is all about. That's mostly what I wanted to say. I think
John, I
I
have
talked
a
about
question for
everything.
you. Can you
Yes.
tell us, because alphabet soup gives me a headache,
Yes.
is it QEP?
QEP is a qualified environmental professional. So essentially, we, on behalf of the ACIDA, can write the phase ones, we can write the phase twos. We can go in and can do the sampling. And ultimately, we'll write up all the reports needed that will eventually be used to get a site into a program like the DCP to get it redeveloped. Yes.
I have a quick question, just
Yes.
so you can comment on it, but how are you finding our inventory, which is a history of oil production, compared to, I guess, be a Herkimer, where Mohawk Valley is very industrial?
Right.
How are you, is there certain protocols and things that happen in a community like us that is less industry-based, or, like the ceramics and all the refineries, different foundries that maybe Mohawk Valley has, and we have oil specific? Are you targeting? I know.
Right.
Because I work with you.
Yeah, so oil wells, right? That is a huge thing in Allegheny County. And I personally haven't worked on the site anywhere in Mohawk Valley that had an oil well or production well on it. But what I can say is, after looking at all the sites that are in the inventory, there are so many properties that I've seen that likely probably use fuel tanks based on, it was a historic, it could be a school. Like, it doesn't have to be an obvious industrial past use. It could be a commercial use. It could be a strip mall that had a dry cleaner in it at one point. And ultimately, we may not even know that until we actually go in there. We look at an old Sanborn map, which again, there's not a lot of Sanborn map coverage around the county. And we can basically deduce, yes?
What's a Sanborn map?
Sanborn map is a historic fire insurance map that's essentially a sketch by an old fire department that date back to, I think the earliest one I've seen is like 1790, if I'm being honest. But they basically cut them all off at like 1960 and they stopped making them. But through these maps, I can really, this is all part of the phase one process, I can really identify places where there's likely historic tanks. There's likely going to be contamination if that tank leaked, if it's still in the ground. They're super, super useful for when we eventually get into the phase two phase where, all right, where are we going to drill? Where do we want to focus our sampling? Let's get back to your question. Every community has dry cleaners and gas stations. Every community has asbestos in their buildings. Every community has schools that use fuel tanks. There are so many, there are laundromats, there are car washes that may have used solvent. And, who knows? Any sort of drummed chemical could be argued as a brownfield because of the potential for contamination. So it doesn't need to be a necessarily known thing. Of course, with an industrial, if you have an old textile mill, yes, they probably have petroleum in the ground somewhere. But with these sites like a school where it's not as obvious, that's where we really need to rely on those maps and historic information. And that, in a small town where there's not as much information available, is where we need to rely on the community to kind of give that information. Especially from stories or, hey, I know that this used to be a dump over here, or I knew that this portion of the site used to be an industrial waste area where they kept all the drums. It could be as simple as that. So ultimately, that's long-winded stories.
Excuse me 1 second. You had brought up oil refineries?
Yeah,
Because I know there was one.
Yes.
at the-
But there was a lot of smaller ones.
Yeah, we have not seen any of them yet.
There's like a secrecy around this, so people are like, heard that property you bought had catering on it, I would talk about it, you might be on the hook or something.
Well, that's what we're hoping to
This is
untangle.
our history though, it's probably a lot of oil.
We haven't seen any oil refineries yet, right?
No.
But we do know there's a number of abandoned wells.
There's,
Right, yeah, I'm not talking about oil, I'm talking more about.
this would be older, Friendship had at least one refinery.
Did Bolivar as well?
Oliver had,
Is it not, is that in our?
It's in there, yeah.
Both are in there.
Sinclair Oil Refinery is in there.
I'll go into old houses and I'll find like little cans of oil that say made in Wellsville. I'm like, oh, I wonder where that was made.
Right,
I mean, there's a lot of little places that were doing tanneries, stuff like that.
right,
Where secrecy's been the word for the last, couple decades.
Right.
You're like, don't let anyone know that you have these, because DC will come and charge you and all that.
Right.
But I guess my question, the point is that because we are uniquely in oil.
no, it was that, yeah, we were
Compared to Mohawk Valley, which has those huge factories. and
Sure.
Maryland, sort of thing.
right,
Is there specific remedies to what we have on with oil? Is it, will be handled different?
right. Well, I think this is an interesting question because we haven't gotten to the phase yet, but I would say that when the time comes for when we actually identify a site that could have petroleum in the ground, like an oil refinery likely probably does, if it's over a certain level, once we sample for it in surface soil, that is good information to demonstrate that a site is contaminated. And once we have that phase 2 analytical data that proves that, that is information that we can then take to the BCP program for a developer if we want to develop that site and say, there's obviously petroleum contamination, VOCs, xylene, ethylbenzene that are over criteria. That information is then useful to prove that the site is contaminated. You then get the money to clean that petroleum up out of the ground.
Right, and I'm the reason I ask.
Yes.
I've been working with you, and these are the questions I'm getting.
Yeah.
If say they find 100 contaminated sites, obviously there's only enough money to do 20.
Right,
What happens to the 80% of them that they don't have a desirable developmental footprint, where you don't want it, it's just on the stick somewhere.
right,
Now it's been identified,
what happened?
what happened, now they want to sell their property, they have this phase 1
right.
showing that, and there's not enough money in the county to pay for their cleanup.
Well, so I guess one way to look at it is it's not your father's EPA or DEC anymore, okay? Because remember in the 1980s, when they found Love Canal, and all those other places, they came up with very draconian laws, right? Surplus said, if your fingerprints were on that title, even if you didn't do anything, you can be held liable for it, right? And that, at that time, for argument's sake, froze the real estate market. Everyone was so afraid to touch anything, right? Since then, I have to give the EPA a lot of credit because they have come up with a number of provisions that clarify liability and loosen the liability and funding programs to help people through because they realized what they did was not exactly what their goal was. So now, for example, if you didn't cause the contamination, you won't be held liable. Or for argument's sake, I'm jumping over a bunch of things, but generally it's not me. And that's why phase 1 is so important. So if someone does a phase 1 on a site, and they can prove that it wasn't them, more or less they won't be held liable. Okay? New York State, as a matter of fact, in the last budget, just passed a law that said municipalities will not be held liable for any environmental contamination so long as they didn't cause it. Which was great because that so many municipalities are frozen about acquiring a site that's potentially contaminated because they could be held liable. New York State said, we won't bother you. EPA has essentially said the same thing for under the bona fide purchaser agreement. So there's a number of ways you can avoid liability now. So, and as a matter of fact, now in New York State, developers have learned how to take advantage of it in a positive way because now you can get tax credits when you clean up these sites. The EPA came up with this funding program to help communities identify the sites, investigate them, getting rent, and potentially remediate them. So you're seeing a very, they realize they caused this problem, and they've come up with a number of ways to address it. Now, my last comment is, if nothing's been done on those sites already, I don't think they're that bad. I could bring you to a lot of sites across the state that the DEC is well aware of, but they're just not really interested in it, because there's sites that are a lot worse.
Right, not even from a punitive standpoint, it's more from, landowners to say, I have a contaminated site, I'm pretty sure I do. They're not gonna wanna do my site, they're gonna do the sites that, you know.
Well, that comes down to, this comes down to essentially the group decides, right? That decides what sites to look at. And to me, it comes down, does the site offer economic development potential? And is it a potential?
Someone has built, right?
Yeah.
So now they have a phase one showing they're contaminated, so they don't want, it looks bad to sell it, and they can't.
No, because the purchaser would be held liable then. The purchaser wouldn't be held liable then.
Right, the phase one doesn't vindicate or put any extra pressure on the current owner. If
If
anything,
someone trying to buy that, I'm talking from a specific conversation I had, so they own a property, it's probably contaminated.
Is it residential or commercial? Or industrial?
Used to be used to be commercial, and then it was just residential, it was residential and commercial, and we store, auto place, carving out there, all that stuff. Now, if they do phase one gets done on it, it'll prove that it's contaminated, it's out in the sticks, they're not gonna, they don't think they'll get money the way that someone would be, that we wanted for a new development.
right,
But now they have phase one showing that it's contaminated, and they don't want to sell it, so that they're, like, why would I do the phase one if I thought, hey, I'm not gonna get money to clean it up, because I'm out here, they're gonna do the Wellsville and the ones off Reed Six.
right.
And if I do the phase one, now I prove that it's contaminated, now someone wants to buy it, they're buying, they'd rather, you know.
Well, one thing to understand about the phase one.
See how it could be other these problems.
I see what you're saying.
The phase one would not have to get reported to anybody.
Right,
So that's, I hesitate to say it's not a public document, but it's not readily available to the public. Okay, nor does it have to be, so it's between the parties for argument's sake. Okay, and number two is, all that is a document review, it doesn't mean it's contaminated.
the phase one doesn't prove contamination.
True.
It just identifies areas that are considered recognized environmental.
And he's,
Right.
bless you.
Again, this is just the public.
Right, no, but this is- This is the
forum.
big nut to crack. Right? Well, I was gonna say something else there. Oh, now I forget what it was.
Something about the phase one
How is it
Proving.
being-
versus,
No, I lost the thought.
Not to get us off the rail, listen, that's,
No, but
that's
this
that's the talk that I hear on the streets, it's like, what if why would I do this if they're never
No,
gonna build anything here anywhere?
Absolutely, but you know what?
My grandma had a car dealership, and now there's a bunch of.
The other way to look at it is, problem's not going away.
Right, exactly.
They have an opportunity now to get some assistance to recognize what it is. The DEC and EPA are not gonna jump in and say, hey, you gotta do this and that. That, I can't guarantee that's not gonna happen, but I've never seen that happen. In this type of scenario. But keep your head in the sand, if you can help them. Keep your head in the sand, they're not gonna move anything.
Right.
Well, it's like, learn more, because that's what these are for.
It's about education, getting people to understand.
Right.
That's
that's why talking about it kind of gets rid of a lot of that stigma of, well, I'm gonna be held liable if anyone comes in and checks out the property, which is not the case.
I might be jumping the gun, but I'm thinking ahead a little bit. One of the big parts of selling this to a community, they'll want to know what's going to go into place there. Now,
Sure.
what limits are there on the kind of places you can put in that site after it's cleaned up?
Right,
That'd be the big selling point in my,
right,
That's.
I mean, it's a later phase.
That's the community planning process.
right,
So, in theory, right, you have the planning board, and that's the public's way to have a say in what goes on sites. First of all, you have your zoning code, then you have your comprehensive plan, and then I assume here, any, site development plan has to go before the planning board. That's your control, so it's not like you're opening everything up and everything goes crazy. No, it's, there,
Right.
if anything, it
I'm
gets
just wondering
more.
what limits do they put on the kind of thing, building
Well, so,
business that's gonna be put there?
Right.
If it's been dirty.
right, well, there are no limits per se, other than what it's cleaned up to. So
Right.
let's assume we have a contaminated site. And then it gets cleaned up to, commercial standard.
Right.
That means then, whoever develops that site can only put a commercial activity or industrial activity on it. They can't put single-family residences on it.
Right.
Okay, so you clean it up to a standard. That's why when sites get selected, that you're going to investigate and clean up. You want to understand what the community wants on it, what the zoning says, because you want to clean it up in concert with the planning activities that are going on, so it matches.
This is what I'm thinking of, is the recent contamination over in Ishra Valley by the new Great Lakes Cheese Company.
Right.
Those people thought it'd be a great idea, and stuff, but you see how it can get you back. I don't know what kind of land they developed it on, it's across from the golf course,
Right.
but they leached into the
An offsite property.
Was it their septic system or was it discharge?
yeah, the discharge is
Discharge.
fine, and it killed all the fish.
Well, that's a one-time thing. I mean, hopefully they went in and, it was they had a malfunction in the wastewater treatment system. And I know this sounds terrible, but the stream will take care of itself. It'll recover. Give it time. I mean, other than the fish,
Yeah.
but it'll take care of itself. It'll come back.
What prevents it from happening? Yeah,
They have a discharge permit. So essentially, I know very little about that. There was a malfunction in the treatment system. And then wastewater got through the system, didn't properly get treated, got discharged to the stream. They realized that, I think they shut it down, and they had to make the adjustments to the wastewater treatment system. They're getting beaten up by the DEC is beating them up on that one.
I know it was a number of years ago, but they decided not to put it up here by 86. It was protested quite vehemently by some people I know from the North Country. And I'm just wondering, was that just that they thought it would be an environmental problem or something else?
Right.
You talking about the cheese factory?
Yeah, they were gonna build it up.
People protest a lot of things like that.
Yeah, I know, but I'm just saying.
Yeah, a cheese factory in itself is pretty benign. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
the biggest thing you have there is the whey, and the whey probably got in the river, and the whey is very oxygen dependent, and it's gonna suck all the oxygen out of the river, and the
Right.
fish don't have anything to breathe.
Right.
And then once the river is able to
Well, it's
work itself out,
It's like the ocean.
it'll, I'm not advocating discharging like that,
No, I'm
but
just wondering what premise they had for rejecting it. I mean.
probably increased
Cheese
traffic.
factory doesn't sound
Yeah,
like.
but increased traffic, because you have the milk trucks coming and going,
It was generally, it was generally just a function of that they couldn't make the land work for the size of the factory at the end of the day. It was really a function of that. It wasn't anything environmental or anything.
It was not environmental.
It was the land, just the land and the space we had.
It was
that we were
actually,
getting it. It
it's
wasn't
actually power, it was a power issue.
Power too, yeah. It's a land size.
It was only a power issue.
Right, back to your speech.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, because at first, they figured probably the transportation would be great, because right next to the highway. You know,
I would think.
trucks and everything.
Right.
Yeah. Maybe that's.
Right.
It's been 10 years probably since they said no.
Sure.
So John, to date, how many brownfields have you identified in Allegheny County?
I'm over 200, close to 200 so far. And that is strictly going off of basically the sites that are already registered in petroleum bulk storage, which is the tank database that DEC makes public. And specifically those properties that have closed IDs that are no longer active, meaning that the tanks were either removed or the tanks are registered and still maybe in the ground inactive. So that was a huge database I used. And then in general, just going out up and down city streets, I can kind of tell which properties are not as used. I added them to a list. Any historic dry cleaner I added that I could find.
And
And
historians of the town.
Historians gave some.
A couple of the towns participated pretty well.
Yep.
Now, one thing to understand, You use the number 200, does not mean they're contaminated.
No,
Okay?
it's potential. I should use potential.
Potential.
Right. So until we actually go in there and do the phase one, and really until we do the phase two, we can't prove that it's contaminated, but we can say that from past use, that's known that there's a high potential that, yes, there could be a
It's a
brownfield.
pretty good guess if there's been oil in it.
Right, right.
But I also understand that oil contamination is easily understood, but very well understood,
Right,
relatively inexpensive to clean up. You can actually leave residual contamination in the ground. It's a matter of really preventing the contamination from migrating from the site and having dermal contact. So you want to make sure there's no contamination on top of the soil and nothing's leaving the site. Nothing's leaving.
Because we are, Coal Creek is right on the same level as that old oil company. And you don't want to reach them into the creek and into the river. That's-
right. Or into a private well on
Yeah.
that property. Right. So ultimately, all of the sites I have so far are, that number is likely much higher, but there's only so much information that I have access to. So ever since the grant was awarded, the inventory is something that is constantly being added to over time. And until we go in there and demonstrate that it's not a brownfield, meaning that it's, there is no contamination, there's many more to come. And I think that's where we need the community to voice sites that they want to see, or sites that may have been sitting there for years. Everyone is aware of in the town, but it's not as readily accessible based on the lack of information that I have and the IDA has. So yeah, step one is the inventory, and then we evaluate as an IDA, as a community, county, to pick which sites to move forward with as priority sites that we then elevate to phase one. And then from there, we can decide if we want to do a phase two.
Do you have a list of, I'm on the board at Hope University,
Yeah,
and when you guys do Hope, we own, any building that's active, we own,
sure,
and find tenants and such.
right,
If you're coming from Kennedy Vehicle into Hope, on the right-hand side, there's a little property that was a gas station
right,
that we stayed shy of.
yeah,
Can we find out, is that on one of your first lists of 200?
it may be.
Give us the address, we can do
Right.
some quick research on it.
I want to say maybe I know the exact gas station you're talking about.
Have a tire dump, I don't know, in front of it.
Yeah,
We shied away from both that and where there was a lumber yard.
sure,
We're the developer there.
right,
And we've been able to find tenants, we've been able to find money to keep those buildings alive.
right.
We've shied away from that part.
Well, if you want, that's the kind of information we're looking for. Give us the address, we'll get, we'll
There's
have to
sewer
work with
water.
Craig, we'll get back to you
It's
on
got
it.
all utilities. It is. Well, we don't, we shied away from
Somebody else there?
Yeah, it's still a private family. I'm pretty sure.
Right, that sounds like the exact type of site that we would be interested in adding to the inventory. So,
And just out of interest, John, you don't need anybody's permission to propose a site. You don't need to speak to the owner or anything like that. Anybody can propose a
Right.
site and then we'll do the rest of that work, right?
right, it's strictly anecdotal information. An address is really all I need, to be honest. And we need to have the EPA then approve that site if we decide that it's a good candidate for a phase one. So basically, I look at a quick history of the site, send it to the EPA. They basically are just checking to see, is it a greenfield? Has this ever been developed? Is it already in a program being assessed under a different state program, different EPA program? And from there, then we decide, okay, what's the redevelopment potential? Or maybe it's just an informational phase one that's just, that's as far as it goes. If there's no interest from the owner to move forward with the phase two, it can stop right there. So basically, this grant gives you that power to go in there and assess it without having someone front the money to pay for it, because the EPA will provide the
Father
funds.
said that there's a property that people built log homes from.
Yeah.
That surrounds it, that was all part of that property at one time, and they just, that's sitting on the same soil.
Sure,
So it's actually two private properties that
Right.
make up that parcel.
right, right. And any heavy equipment that may have been on that property over the years may have leaked from the PCB oil
may have leaked any number of, pretty much any site use that may have involved the use of oil. Kind of is what the EPA would consider a potential site. So,
We're not supposed to be a developer.
right,
The only way we can keep Main Street alive is to be a
To be a
developer.
developer.
right.
Listen, give us the address to look at, we'll talk to Craig.
Right.
Craig, somebody.
Tom's got my email, so he just sent it to me.
I gave you my card, so feel free to email me.
These guys are great, good chance it's already on there.
Right,
Yeah, I would think so.
right. I thought I specifically remember.
But it may, it probably includes that second.
Right, right, yeah. If it was active in the nineties, if it was an active gas station in the nineties, a good chance I have it. Because that's where their DEC did a good job of starting to document where these,
It might have been before that.
okay. See, those are the ones we're really after, because,
Right, you have a specific interest in redeveloping and creating something of it, then that becomes a higher priority site for us.
okay, that's what I had.
All right, so, this to me is like the most important thing we have here. This is a preliminary review of the brownfield. You probably can't see this from there, but these lines going across, this is all your infrastructure. The point is, the potential brownfields are where your infrastructure is. If you want to have economic development, I don't know if everyone wants to have economic development here, but in theory, when a developer comes in and looks for a site, and it has all of the infrastructure, and then you find out there's a potential for contamination, odds are they'll keep on walking. Because they have to come up, they have to have more time, it adds time to their project, it adds aggravation, and it adds cost. The whole point of this program is to help identify the best sites for economic, some of the sites for economic development, some of the best sites for economic development, so that when developers come in, we know we have a 5-acre site that we have all the environmental for, that has all the utilities on it, and then we can attract a developer to it. That's the whole point, is when we attract developers, we can increase tax revenue, we can create jobs, all of that good stuff. So this is the whole point of it. It's like we're looking for sites that, have economic development potential, their infrastructure. Typically, they've already been used. Because this is upstate New York. And, we have an industrial history, maybe not so much here as compared to other parts of the state, but, there's, most likely your sites all along your infrastructure have been used. And another important thing to realize, EPA estimates, and I see this number all the time now, I don't know if it's true or not, but the point is there's 450,000 brownfields across the nation now. Thing is, that number's been around for 10 years, it's not going to, which is kind of, but the other big thing to understand is that the EPA and DEC have done a great job in understanding what the issues are and starting to work with communities and the public to help make it easier to address these brownfields. So as I said earlier, one big thing is EPA now has brownfield grants. So essentially, Craig at Allegheny County IDA got a grant for $500,000 to start inventorying the sites, doing phase 1, phase 2 on these sites, doing remediation planning, so that if the developer's interested in the site, Craig can say, I have all the environmental, as a matter of fact, I have a BCP program. And then Craig can even offer to say, I can get all the documents done for you, so that, when they start doing remediation, it's already in the program, Craig has to transfer it over to them, they can get the tax credits for the site. So it's creating this mechanism to help address these sites moving forward. And like John was saying, these brownfields are just about anything. Houses can technically be a brownfield because they have asbestos in them. So when the land bank acquired a zombie property with asbestos in it, they have to deal with that asbestos, right? Because now, when they go to remodel it, because they are a commercial entity doing it, you're your own homeowner, you can handle the asbestos. But as soon as you're not the homeowner, you got to handle the asbestos. Craig has funding to do the sampling of it and do the plan for it to get bids, but he doesn't have funding to remove the asbestos, okay?
Another question, if there's a fuel oil tank in the basement,
As
that's
far as
known to be leaking in the building as asbestos.
I guess what are you getting at? Because with a fuel tank in the basement, my first question, if it's a concrete floor, then I'm not.
My,
If it's a
my point
earthen floor.
is that in the eyes of the EPA, if you prove that the property is contaminated under a different program, you can get the building demoed in
Oh,
order to investigate the extent of contamination.
yes, potentially, yes.
Right.
So, so this is another example of a brownfield. This is a classic strip mall, okay? And the issue with strip malls is that, depending on when it was built, I'll probably guarantee there's asbestos in it, but then also, I probably had a dry cleaner in it. Okay? Now, general rule of thumb with dry cleaners, you tell me the dry cleaner was in there from 1970 to 1980, I'm saying, probably spilled a lot of stuff. But just to show how effective environmental laws have been, if you tell me that that dry cleaner was there from like 2013 to today, I'm like, not so worried. Because the environmental laws have caught up with it, there's a lot less of a chance of it getting contaminated. And that's the kind of information that comes out in phase one, okay? Now this is, like John said, this is a Remington Arms site in Ilion. Have you heard about that? So, a million square foot building that was used since the late 1800s manufacturing of firearms. Always been going up and down, high peak employment was like 10,000 people in the 1950s. You know, closed in January 24th. Laid off the last of 300 people. Ilion is a village of, I think, 5,000 people. We do work in Ilion with the Kirkland County IDA. As I was told John Cusick out there, if that thing closed 10 years ago, John would have had no idea what to do with it. But since he had a brownfield grant, has a brownfield grant, he was able to do the phase one, phase two on the site, work with the current owners of the site, get the phase one, phase two done. In the meantime, he was marketing the site. So about 1 year, he was able to attract a developer out of New York City that's going to reload the site. We're working with them now. We're working on getting the site into the DCP program. Because in this case, I'm taking getting it to Brownfield Tactic Program is keeping it whole framework. But we're confident we can get it in there for them. So the whole point of this is to help us identify sites, help people not be scared of them, and build confidence in people that we can tackle these issues. Because what we want to do is when developers come into this community, this area, create control them sites with confidence and say, here's all our environmental, here's the plan, here's what the community wants it, and we get more and more attraction that way. Okay? So a couple of examples. This is a site in Gloversville we're working on now. Former tannery, which whole city is a tannery. But owned by a gentleman out of Queens. We worked with the city on the site. The owner wanted to do something with the site. We worked with the city, did the phase one, phase two, determined it's contaminated. Through our relationships, we were able to attract a developer to the project. He's now working with the owner. It's going through the BCP process, and it's going to get redeveloped for apartments. They're going to take the front building, rehabilitate it. They got money from Homes and Community Renewal. They got a DRI grant. This is upstate New York. I always got to get a lot of government funding. I don't have a lot of capital backing. But we've been able to work through the process. And now it's going to become 80 apartments. Okay, and another great example of what we've been able to do, we work in the city of Troy. We worked on we call it Mount Olympus because it's up high on this big piece of rock. This neighborhood is all blighted. There was one building there, it was like a 4-acre site. It was a former foundry. It has since been, when a place starts decaying, the use of sites start going down, right? So it was a foundry, and it last ended as this little mechanic shop that was really not much. The whole place was, all dilapidated, the neighborhood was dilapidated. But we worked with the city to do the phase one on the site. We knew it was going to be contaminated. and it was a former foundry. We did the phase twos on the site. Because we had that information, we knew a gentleman that was looking for to build housing in Troy. We talked to the gentleman, he now is gonna do a $40 million project on the site. So, one of the big things about this EPA funding, and what everyone likes about it, it has great multipliers to it. So, as an example, on the Troy project, $130,000 investment from the EPA led to a $40 million investment. That's not bad. Great thing about the Brownfield program is that generally it's not a blue or red program. Usually when it gets reauthorized, which is every 10 years, it goes through just about unanimously. So once you get into the program, the EPA will generally take care of you if you do a good job. Because they realize they have to help the community to identify the environmental ills and address them, and they'll stay with you throughout the process, so long as the community does a good job. And you can show some results. And I'm confident we can, but we just need input from the community as to what sites you think would be valuable to be worked on. One of the things, is the county attorney here now?
No.
Okay. One of the big people we need to help us is the attorneys, either the municipal attorneys or county attorneys, because of the ghost properties you have sometimes. Right? These sites that the corporation owned, and either the corporation disappeared, went bankrupt, no one could ever find them, or it was owned in a family, and they moved to Cuba and you can't find them anymore, and they just sit there.
Yeah.
Going back, what the government has done, they've come up with a number of provisions that will allow a community to get control of the site. In New York State, have it's called 19B. If it's a former industrial site, it's abandoned, and they're in arrears on the taxes, the county attorney, the attorney for the taxing authority can go in and make a claim via 19B and get control of it, which is key, because otherwise that site would just continue to decay. And don't mean to harp on Gloversville, but the mayor there has been very active. He's a former attorney, so he understands all this stuff. And he's been able to get control of properties. He had one property that was a foundry. No, I'm sorry, foundry. It was a tannery. It's a classic case. It was a tannery from like 1920 to 1993. They closed, they abandoned it. The broken window, right? Windows started breaking, started going downhill, and then in 2017 there was finally a fire there, and the whole place, decayed. The mayor came into power 2 years before that. They couldn't do anything on the site because they couldn't get control. Talked to the mayor, he finally used 19B to get control of the site. Since then, he's been able to remove the rubble from the site, and now we're doing the investigations to hope turn it into multifamily housing. The most amazing thing there was, this site was right across the street from an elementary school. Right, you're getting what I'm saying? This big pile of rubble. Parents dropped their kids off there, and they were okay with that. Until he addressed the rubble and removed it. Now all of a sudden people say, Mayor, you're not doing enough. What's going on? Where's your next project? The point is, until he realized what he could do, nothing happened. Once he realized the power he had, things started moving. Okay? Questions at all? There were a lot of, when John was talking, there were a lot of questions. Yes?
It's kind of mentioned two subjects, I think. You're talking about the brownfields and the BCP, and then you swap back over to the EPA brownfield, and then you swap back over to New York State BCP, and then you flop back over to EPA. I've done a few cleanups, and I've never gone through the basics or preliminary with an EPA.
Because you didn't have railroad counter on this. Here you have that advantage.
Why would a county or a town or anybody need a grant, why wouldn't the EPA come out on the street and say, here, apply for a grant for, for your cleanup?
You can do that if you want. If you have a specific site, yes. But you have to get a cleanup grant from the EPA, you have to have the phase 1 and phase 2 done already.
Done. Why doesn't the DEC go back? Why wouldn't the DEC tell me, say, hey, run back to the DEC, or run back to the EPA and do an application there also?
The EPA and DEC, in theory, have different philosophies. DEC's program is more based on just the tax credits once you get all the information. So they leave it to people like you to go out and do everything and then go to the DEC and get into the DCP program all on your own dime. And they're not really priming the municipal market. EPA is all about priming the municipal market, creating these inventories, do the phase 1, phase 2s, and start attracting the developers. And so the key is you combine the two programs. So hopefully what happens here is Craig is doing the inventories, getting phase 1, phase 2s, getting all this information together to attract the developers. I've got all this information for you. Now all we have to do is jump into the DCP program.
In the words of Keir Durwell, nothing's real until it's real. Here for that.
Definitely.
But the point is, there is an APA cleanup grant, too, now I'm sure you're aware of that. And we can't even apply for one until we're 70% done with our current assessment grant. And so, and then back to here again, there's a dream that eventually would be able to apply for that and get a cleanup
I
grant. That's what's
understand
happening, too.
that. I guess I'm guilty of not knowing that the EPA, that I could have ran to the EPA first.
Well, you
ran
can't
some
go, see,
money.
that's the difference. You can't. It's gotta be a government entity, if you create a 501(c), you can get at it. You have to be an authorized like land clearing entity. As a private person, you can't get an EPA grant.
So that's why the confusion when you're saying, oh, go get the EPA and the DEC and the
Right.
EPA and the DEC. They don't meld together
Seamlessly.
Well, no.
seamlessly as a.
Well, correct. From your perspective, we're just trying to get this going. Right, so we're using the EPA money to start identifying the sites to put them into the DCP. Okay? So now the DEC actually does have money to clean up sites. But that's all for municipalities, and there's a cost share with that also. Okay, but no, the EPA is all about helping the community getting sites ready. Is that something else then?
No, I guess not.
So another,
I guess with EPA grant, what you're saying is you really don't even need control of the property. You just go in, it's a county.
no, that's not as well.
EPA.
So with the EPA grant, you can work on private property. Okay? But you need the permission of the site owner to do a phase 2 on the site. So if you own a site in Allegheny County that you want to have a phase 2 done on, you can go to Craig and he can, as long as you get it approved by EPA, we can work on your site. So the funding can go to private sites.
Okay.
So long as you have to have permission to work on the site. So now getting inside the game a little more, because one of the problems is this is a very big topic and the solution for each site is different. So going back to the county, if the county wants to get control of a site that is owned by a ghost corporation, and the ghost corporation is in foreclosure, okay? And the county I see a lot of counties and cities is like, we're not touching that site. I don't know what's on it. They just let it sit there and rot. Okay. New York State came out with a provision probably 15 years ago. It's called temporary incidents of ownership, where it's once again, the taxing authority, the city, the county, and how it's set up, can go before a judge and say, they owe us taxes. I can't find the people. And I want to acquire the site, but I'm concerned about the potential environmental liability. The judge then will say, you have 90 days, 6 months, how long do you need? We'll take 6 months to go into our phase 1, phase 2 on it. then the county has enough information to decide if they want to foreclose on it. The only thing is the judge would send the reports and the information to the owner they could find, and they have so much time to get back. If they don't say anything, then the taxing authority can get the property and then it can start getting rehab and the blight removed. That's another example of what the governments have done to help alleviate these problems. There's a lot of tools out there now.
This is an aside to this, for these, ghost properties and whatnot. We found out, I've done some research on it, that a lot of these corporations or banks that do, own these properties, they have 90 days to get it in repairable situations, or could be rented or what. So like almost at 90 days, they sell it to another corporation and the clock goes back to now the new company gets another 90
Well, yeah,
days.
there's games on.
It's a game, so
Right.
when you're trying to address some of these properties in your neighborhood, you get into that, and I would hope that this, if you went to court and they were playing these games, that this will supersede this now and help you jump over that so that the
And
town.
could, and what I see a lot of successful municipalities with brownfield programs, what they'll do is make sure they have, like you're saying, provisions, whereas they'll have like an anti-blight program. And if there's blight on site, they can come in and say, here's a fine for $50, you gotta start repairing this. The owner doesn't do anything, then, in a month now it goes up and your fine on the site keeps on going up so that the taxes they owe or whatever become more interesting. It gets their attention. And it gives the municipality a way to get in at that site to remove that blight, if that makes sense.
And if it is blight like that, you can go to your, code officers and you can file an anonymous complaint. So they're not gonna know that you did it.
Yeah.
Unless you're-
Other questions? Must be some other, here's got a question back there. So look at the brownfields as an opportunity to help deal with blight, contaminated properties. But to me, one of the biggest things, if you want to have economic development, when these people come in looking for sites, they want to know what's going on with the site. This gives you an opportunity to do the phase 1, phase 2s on the site. The developers are not scared of contamination as much as they used to be. But what they are scared of is the additional time it does. So if you have all that information for them, because, to have development, you want to remove all the unknowns as much as you can. As we know, development is tough enough, but on the brownfield, it's even tougher. So if you can get all of the unknowns in a box for them, and say, here's all the environmental information, here's the cost, here's a path through it. Because there are so many programs out there now to assist with this. And a lot of times now, like we work in a lot of communities, like if a community gets a home and community renewal grant for a site, one of the things they have to do before they can do anything is phase 1. Then they can get into this program, take the money from there, and do the phase 1 to meet that need. So it's a matter of cobbling everything together. And I'm sorry I intermixed things, but that's everything gets so intermixed now. It's all about capital stacking. Okay, anything else?
Now, the biggest thing I'd add, if you do have sites, like I know Tom had mentioned, if anybody else in there, just please let us know. You can contact us, we'll add the sites, we'll look at them. And the group that's making decisions isn't me, it's
No,
Tom.
it's not.
It's the county, we got the county attorney, Chris Knapp's on it, like Ashley Smith's on the group, and John, and we have a discussion on all the sites all the time, so. Melissa's on there, so.
Yeah,
Peter and Jason.
and Kira
I mean, there's
and
quite a
Jason.
bit of the group here as well.
And EPA jumps on the call once a quarter.
They're coming once a month at this point. They're our representatives.
How has Esmeralda been?
She's doing quite well.
I mean, she's wonderful. isn't
Yes, she's excellent. Now that she's back to work.
Yes, yes. I mean, these EPA people in the Brownfield group are not out looking for trouble. They're out looking to help. Because in a lot of ways, EPA realizes in a lot of ways they've caused this problem. And they're trying to help, give the tools to the communities to help them solve, because they realize a lot of these properties are just gonna sit there and rot.
And I can confirm one thing that Tom said, there are developers, even with hotels and whatnot, the first thing they ask me, is it on Brownfield?
Correct, and people look at
It's the
it.
first thing they ask, because they want the Brownfield tax credits.
And every property now, anytime a developer or someone goes to buy a property, you always want to see a phase one, right? You always want phase one on a property.
I mean,
You'd be a fool not to buy it.
I don't wanna scare everybody in the room, but you go borrow money anymore for a house, you've gotta have a phase one.
Yeah.
You've gotta have phase one. You've gotta have somebody go in and see if there's lead paint, see if there's asbestos on the truck.
And guess who has money here to help with that? And like I said, the EPA and DEC have realized a lot of ways the problems they've caused, and they're very helpful. I don't know how, I haven't done any work in Cattaraugus, to be honest with you. How is the DEC Brownfields person out there?
It's run out of Buffalo.
So they're very good, they're very educated.
Buffalo's, they're great people.
Yeah, generally I find.
I'd rather work, I mean, honestly, I'd rather work with the DEC Brownfields program on Buffalo than I would the DEC, hopefully not here.
No.
DEC Minerals Program.
Correct.
Out of Allegheny, regulating oil and gas and gravel mining and whatnot.
Oh, I think we'll admit, I think we'll agree the worst is the natural resources people for the wetlands and all that.
It's just, the brownfields, once they get to know you and the trust is there, you call them up and they're down, where we're dealing with the minerals department sometimes.
Because what I find is that the DEC Brownfield people are there to help, and when you submit the application to the DEC, they become your advocate to get that project through the system. And they want to work with you. Because they realize that if they don't have any applications coming in, they don't have a job. And in a lot of ways, it's a feel-good program because you're helping the community remove money, have economic development, generate jobs, and successful programs are very successful. Like I was saying, we're Remington Arms. EPA's probably spent like $250,000 on that investigation. It could be $1 billion investment.
Are they very successful with getting residential properties built on land as opposed to?
Absolutely. So generally speaking, when you go, you can definitely build residential on brownfields. Generally not single-family homes though. They gotta be apartments, things with like, homeowners association,
Yeah.
condominiums, things like that.
Yeah, we have a shortage in our end of the county in housing and apartments for the elderly. There's a big cry for that, and there's a lot of.
Affordable housing.
There
in this county.
is a huge need for housing. Most of our work's in the Mohawk Valley, and I think the figure there is 70% of the housing was built before 1937.
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you think there's a need for
I
housing?
grew up in Geneva, same thing.
The New York State is putting a lot of money into housing. One thing I've come to realize as an engineer, society comes up with things, the government spends money on, it's the engineer's job to help solve that problem. They're putting a lot of money into housing, because one of the problems you have now costs a lot of money to build a house, right? All your house is upside down, so they're helping with that under HCR. But you can definitely build houses. It's very tough to build single-family housing now.
Yeah, right, yeah, it's a lot of restrictions.
Well, you can build, you can build really anything on a brownfield. You can build we were working to build a daycare center on a contaminated site. Had meetings with DEC and Department of Labor and the Health Department. It's not done yet, but there's a path to it. They just said really have to have sub-slab depressurization, everyone know what that is?
Yeah, of course.
Right now it does. And generally it goes in all buildings now. You guys familiar with radon systems? Exact same thing. In that, if you have volatiles in the ground, they'll volatilize, and in theory, they could potentially get into a building if there's cracks and things like that in the building floor. Especially in the wintertime when you have all the, sucking the heat, it's pressure in there, it's sucking everything in. The way to do it is you put in a sub-slab depressurization system, and when you're building new construction, it's relatively inexpensive because when you put down your crushed gravel to lay your concrete down, before you put the concrete down, you'll lay pipe across it with slots in it. And then you just hook those to a vacuum, So that then when the building is constructed, there's a slow flow that prevents anything from beneath getting into the building. Very common, all right, probably done that on all your buildings. Very common. So they're gonna allow us to do that. Now, it's whether the county wants to do it or not, but that meeting says, yep, you can do that, here's what you gotta do.
Because, see, where we are in Fillmore, in that area of Houghton, we're having a problem, for example, new families coming to Houghton or Fillmore, or professors and their families that want to go there, and it's hard to attract people if you have no housing.
Yeah.
You know, and if we can develop those, that's worth it.
So, yes, I mean, it's a matter of like, in theory, in that area, we would look for housing, typically developers for housing on 5-acre sites. We can inventory those, if it's contaminated, do the phase 2 on it, and we could say to the guy, I can get the brownfield tax credits if you build that. Okay? Anything else? There's a solution for everything. It's whether we're willing to do it or not. All right, well, thank you very much.
We're all set.
Anything closing, any closing comments?
No, like I said, I guess the biggest closing comment is hopefully we've got some information out to you. And share that information, and if there are sites, get to me or get to Melissa, and we'll get the sites added. And then we'll review the sites. And our goal is to obviously help on the Blake side, but also help to get development going in the county. So that's the real goal. Okay, well,
Thank you for coming. My cards are by the door if you wanted to email me any information. We do have a Brownfield's website. Feel free to visit it. It's right on the acida.org website, and then there's a Brownfield link there. And we'll keep things updated there if you're interested. And grab a card. And thank you so much for coming. If you did sign in, if you wouldn't mind on your way out, that would be